All right, guys, we're going to take a little break from COVID and share with you some of the big news of a story that we've been following. But the WHO pandemic treaty is dead for now. Anyway, they do feel like they might be able to resuscitate it, but it is dead for now. So if you remember, this pandemic treaty would set legally binding policies for member countries of the WHO, that includes the United States, on how to respond during a pandemic. So that would be for the next disease X or COVID that would circulate around, the WHO would be in charge of the pandemic response. That was something that was pushed back heavily by many freedom-loving people that said, we do not want to be at the behest of some global body that is, for one, heavily funded by organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and not by our elected political leaders. People did not want to be behest to the unelected officials who get to control our lives. And so they were supposed to be voting on this and they were going to adopt it last week, but it failed. They were unable to adopt it. This has been reported on now. Here's Children's Health Defense. The WHO, the treaty is done. WHO pandemic treaty defeated, at least for now, because they're wanting to bring it back. They're saying, well, okay, this is on pause is what they're calling it, but we'll see if it actually gets reinvigorated. But they're saying that the critics called this obviously a global power grab, threatened national sovereignty, health freedom, personal liberties, free speech, while promoting risky gain-of-function research and health passports. That is one thing that they wanted to get on board, was everybody in the world getting on board with the same response during a pandemic, which I can understand kind of sounds like it makes sense, except so many of us were against how the world responded to COVID. So it would be okay if everybody responded okay, I suppose. I mean, I don't think it's ever a good idea to give away your sovereignty and let somebody else control how you react as a country to anything. But they didn't react okay during the pandemic. They reacted it was insane. And so why would we then say, okay, then you could be in charge? I'm going to go ahead and play for you what Tedros, the WHO general director, what he had to say about the death of the pandemic treaty for now. This is what he had to say.
My wish is we will come out of the assembly re-energized, inspired. We will try everything, believing that anything is possible, and make this happen, because the world still needs a pandemic treaty and the world needs to be prepared, because many of the challenges that caused the serious impact during COVID-19 still exist. Starting from equity, for instance, was the center of this negotiation. So still exist. And we should really prepare the world. So let's continue to try everything, and anything is possible. And as we always say, if there is a will, there is a way. So I'm still positive, to be honest, despite the outcome. That's what I am. That's what I believe. There could be hiccups. The issue is, what do we learn from it and move? This is not a failure. Even when I fail, by the way, many times, I try to learn what happened and then move on. Failure doesn't stop us, it should not stop us. But this is not failure. You have really done a lot. You have progressed a lot. I don't call it failure.
Okay. Well, I'm going to call it a failure. and for good reason. This is something that we did not want countries to adopt. There was a lot of pushback from it. The UK said, we're not signing this. The United States, obviously, there was just a lot of pushback and they couldn't come to an agreement. Luckily what they couldn't come to an agreement on, I don't know if was really the reasons why you and I would reject the pandemic treaty. You and I would reject it because we'd say this is an infringement on our sovereignty and how, we're going to trust you to guide us through a pandemic when you guys got it so wrong last time. Which, by the way, he mentions this isn't the end because COVID could happen again. They swore up and down when they were locking us down and taking away our lives and our livelihoods and our freedoms. They were swearing up and down that this was a once in a lifetime event, that it would never happen again, that this is just so rare. And yet here they are now saying, well, it's going to happen again, so we better be ready. I mean, which is it? Is it going to happen again, or is this a once in a lifetime thing? Are you planning on doing this over and over and over again? If they could adopt this, probably, certainly. The fact that they couldn't adopt it, then maybe we actually have a shot at that actually being a once in a lifetime event. So that's kind of interesting about them pushing forward on this, wanting to push forward on this, wanting to get something through, acting like, well, disease X is coming. Okay. No, never again. We should all just say never. We're not going to go through that again. We're just not doing it. Mary Holland, the CEO of Children's Health Defense, she says the reason why this whole thing ended up not going through was because of all of us who pushed back on this. She says it's a huge tribute to civic action that the WHO treaty and regulations have apparently failed. While delegates to the World Health Assembly are still engaged in last-minute negotiations outside of approved procedures, they do not have a consensus to move forward with a legal infrastructure to conduct COVID operations. This is great news for the world's citizens and shows us how powerful we can be when we work together creatively. Totally agree. But again, I don't think they rejected it for the reasons you and I would have rejected it. I think they rejected it because they were like, who's going to pay for this? Who's going to pay for vaccine equity? Who's going to pay? Meaning, because one of the issues that they're talking about in this meeting, the reason why they framed why they needed to have this pandemic treaty was for global equity. There were countries that didn't have access to the vaccines. They were poorer countries. They couldn't manufacture their own vaccines. They couldn't buy vaccines. That means they would have to be given the vaccines. Well, we all know that the big pharma companies don't want to do any of that. They don't want to give away vaccines. They were making a boatload of money off of the pandemic. They like that. They want to keep that going. They want to do that again. So on one hand, it's kind of it's one of the reasons why this failed was because they couldn't agree on who would pay for that vaccine equity, who would pay for distributing free vaccines around the world. They couldn't come to an agreement on that. That in and of itself is kind of a bad sign because that actually shows that big pharma is still behind it and thinking, no, we got a lot of money to make. We want to push another pandemic and make a lot of cash. We don't want to be giving anything away for free. The other thing is they couldn't figure out who was going to pay for their surveillance system, the surveillance being the vaccine passports, or because they need to surveil the spread of the virus, or they want to surveil when viruses are coming along. You know, there are some certain surveillance areas in the world. I know there was one in South Africa. That's how they discovered Omicron. And then everybody blamed South Africa and said, oh, you started Omicron. It came from you. And South Africa said, no, we just were the ones that found it through our surveillance. So setting up these surveillance systems that would look for viruses. I don't want that. Do you want that? It's okay. It's like a balancing act. We want them to be able to see when there are some legitimate scary pathogens that are going to be floating around. We would like to be forewarned, but we all know that they're not going to use the surveillance responsibly. They're going to use it recklessly and for their own advantage, which is to make a lot of money off of pushing a lot more vaccines and other restrictions on people. So they couldn't basically, the countries couldn't come to an agreement on who would pay for what. Then the issue is, how would they enforce it? There would be an enforcement issue on this. So look, at the end of the day, these countries couldn't agree, mostly because they were greedy, unfortunately. It works out for us that they're greedy and couldn't agree because now we don't end up with this pandemic treaty that puts us on a path of being beholden to people that are not unelected leaders. So that's where we're at with this. It is defeated. Tedros says, for now, don't get your hopes up too much. We're going to bring it back. We're going to resuscitate this thing. Just like we are the next pandemic, we're going to resuscitate it and make sure it lives long and carries on so that we could continue fear-mongering. So that's where we're at. Big win. Thank goodness. Something we'd been covering for a while. Good news. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iversen show, which you could catch just by heading to that link down below, KimIversonShow.com. You can watch the full show from what you just watched, or you could catch the full show live Monday through Friday, live streams, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you then. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Never miss an episode. Never miss a clip. Never miss a segment. Thanks, guys.